What's up, everybody? On today's show, the national championship game is tonight without an SEC team. We'll catch up with a few national ESPN hosts to get their thoughts on the SEC not being here, and plenty of other SEC news to get you caught up on as we go around the conference. Locked On SEC starts right now.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And what's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On SEC. It's great to have you guys along. Today's episode is brought to you by Jase Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jase case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50 or more infections. Get yours today at Jase Medical. It's Jase medical.com. I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. All right, we got plenty to get into. We're going to talk a little bit about the SEC not being in the championship tonight. Of course, we know for the first time in a decade, SEC not playing in the conference championship game. Good luck to Washington. Good luck to Michigan. Whatever, but we got a lot of other stuff we got to get to, so let's jump into it. Let's go around the conference.
Boots out to the right. Takes the handoff. What a catch!
Around the conference.
We start over at LSU as they have officially hired Missouri defensive coordinator Blake Baker as their new DC. Baker helped lead Mizzou to their first 11-win season this past year in almost a decade. He's been a pivotal piece of that defense under Eli Drinkowitz, and Yahoo Sports' Ross Dellinger reporting over the weekend, LSU was expected to make Baker the highest paid assistant coach in college football for next season. Baker's salary expected to be around $2.2 million. Not a bad chunk of change for a defensive coordinator. Now, LSU is replacing Matt House, who was let go along with a couple other defensive assistants a couple of days ago, and Brian Kelly, knowing he had to overhaul that entire offense, and goes and gets a guy that spent the last 2 seasons at Mizzou, was LSU's linebackers coach just 2 seasons ago in 2021. Has a lot of family ties to the Louisiana area. So Blake Baker, 41 years old, native of Houston, played at Tulane before getting into coaching, and we'll see what he does there for LSU. But we'll also have to keep track on who Mizzou will name to replace Blake Baker as their defensive coordinator there at Missouri. Tidbit over at Oklahoma. They're following kind of the same thing that LSU just did a couple of days ago. Brent Venables announcing on Thursday that defensive coordinator linebackers coach Ted Roof, they have mutually agreed to part ways with him. Longtime DC in the college ranks. Roof spent the last 2 seasons with the Sooners after serving as an analyst with Clemson in 2021. So Oklahoma, they ranked second nationally in interceptions this season with 20, but they give up almost 24 points per game and just under 400 yards per game defensively. So Oklahoma saying, well, we got to make some changes defensively. All right, let's get to some guys who announced they're going pro here the last couple of days. Jermaine Burton over at Alabama, after 4 seasons of college football, announced Saturday he has declared for the NFL draft, playing 47 games, starting his career at Georgia and then playing the last couple of years at Alabama. He said, I want to thank God for allowing me the opportunities I've received. To the University of Alabama, it's been an unforgettable experience, and appreciate how memorable you've made this for me. Burton came into the Rose Bowl averaging 22 yards per catch, which led all SEC wide receivers and ranked number 4 in the country. He finished the season year with almost 800 yards and 8 touchdowns. Another guy making official, we kind of knew Malik Neighbors would be heading to the pros, but LSU wide receiver Malik Neighbors on Saturday announced he is heading to the NFL draft, had back-to-back 1,000-yard receiving seasons for LSU, and leaves the program with a career 3,000 yards receiving and 21 touchdowns. Also set the record for career receiving yards. So pretty fantastic career there for Malik Neighbors. He's heading off to the pros. Over at Missouri, Tyron Hopper, 5 seasons in the SEC. He is heading to the NFL draft. Had 2 really nice seasons at Missouri. Also included Florida in his note, where he played his first couple of seasons. and said he's been overwhelmed with gratitude for the incredible experience and people he's met during this journey. Said, my time as a Tiger will stay with me forever. To Gator Nation, thank you for welcoming me in and allowing me to be a part of your journey. So he's officially heading off to the draft. But Tyron Hopper, he was Mizzou's leading tackler at the time of his injury back in November. He was a Butkus Award finalist and had a really nice career. So best of luck to him. And one other guy at Mizzou moving on, Harrison Mevis, their kicker, was fantastic in his career and obviously had that big 61-yarder to beat Kansas State. Made a conference-leading 24 field goals, earned second-team All-SEC recognition, and had the option of returning next year, but not going to go do that. He's heading off to the NFL. All right, other news going on around the conference. How about some guys coming back? At Georgia, offensive lineman Tate Ratledge announced he is coming back for another season in Georgia. He will be a leader on that offensive line. Also, an offensive will have Carson Beck back. They'll bring in Trevor Etienne from Florida. Wide receivers, London Humphreys from Vanderbilt. Collie Young from Miami. Also, Georgia lineman Xavier Truss announced he will be returning for a sixth season of college football. He'll be back next year at Georgia. And on the defensive line, Nazir Stackhouse, fifth season with Georgia coming for him next year. He announced he is coming back. So some big returnees there for the Georgia Bulldogs on the offensive line with Tate Ratledge and Xavier Truss. And then on the D-line, Nazir Stackhouse. Over at Alabama, they're getting one of their defensive players back. Third-year linebacker Deontay Lawson announcing he will return next season. He posted on social media, "I'm back," and captioned it, "Nothing to be said." So Deontay Lawson started 11 games this year, finished third on the defense with 67 tackles, and had a nice year for them. 26 career appearances for the Tide, over 100 career tackles, and he is coming back. But Bama is losing a number of guys, including Dallas Turner, Kool-Aid McKinstry, J.C. Latham, all those guys heading off to the pros. But Deontay Lawson will be back, so that is big for Alabama. All right, let's get to the latest in the transfer portal. At LSU, they lose one of the guys who was their leading rusher this year, Logan Diggs, who transferred in from Notre Dame, started 8 games this year, missed a couple games with an upper body injury. But Logan Diggs entering the portal again. So played at Notre Dame, came into LSU for a year, and he's back into the portal. LSU will have a rushing attack next year of, looks like Josh Williams could come back for another year of eligibility. Caleb Jackson, their freshman this year, that had some nice moments running guys over. They've also bring in Caden Durham, big-time recruit. So LSU's running back room going to look a little bit younger next year. Also, a former LSU wide receiver, Jalen Brown, who entered the portal. He announced he is transferring to Florida State. And LSU did pick up a transfer from the portal in Ohio State defensive back Jair Brown. Has 3 seasons of eligibility left. He is a New Orleans native, spent 2 seasons with the Buckeyes up at Ohio State. Over at Tennessee, offensive tackle Gerald Mincey entering the portal. Pretty interesting news that coming from On3 Sports. He appeared in all 13 games for the Vols this season, started 7 games, and guy who's been there a while and played a lot. So a little surprising there in Gerald Mincey hitting the portal. Over at Mississippi State, Stone Blanton from South Carolina, linebacker. He is from Jackson, Mississippi. He announced he is heading to Starkville, go play for Jeff Lebby and the Mississippi State Bulldogs. He announced on social media that he is coming home. He'll have 2 seasons of eligibility remaining. And good playmaker there for South Carolina on the defensive side. Spent 2 seasons there, appeared in 24 games. And so Stone Blanton back in Mississippi. He'll be wearing a Mississippi State uniform. Over at Alabama, they're losing some depth as backup running back Roydell Williams is hitting the transfer portal. He had just 1 carry in the Rose Bowl for a loss of a yard. Had 64 yards and a touchdown in the SEC championship win over Georgia. But Roydell Williams, talented back, hitting the portal there at Alabama. A few other tidbits from Alabama. Former center Seth McLaughlin, of course, had the snap mishaps in the semifinal game. He has announced that he's continuing his college football career at Ohio State. So Seth McLaughlin visited A&M, but he is heading on to Ohio State, according to reports. Former Alabama quarterback Eli Holstein, he is transferring to Pittsburgh. So it's a big-time recruit that came to Alabama, hit the portal. He is heading to play for Pat Narduzzi up there at Pittsburgh. And then lastly, defensive back Earl Little has committed to Florida State. Former Alabama Crimson Tide defensive back, played sparingly during his 2 seasons there. Saw time in 8 games this past season. So caught you up on the Alabama guys. Over at Texas A&M, former Florida defensive back Jaden Hill, he will spend his final year of eligibility playing for Mike Elko and the Aggies. Hill started 11 games this past year, appeared in 12 for the Florida Gators, set career high marks in tackles for loss and sacks. Also, former Florida linebacker Scooby Williams committed to Texas A&M. So a couple of former Florida Gators had to go play for the Aggies. And last season was Scooby Williams' most productive, had 53 tackles, a sack, 4 tackles for a loss. So A&M racking up on the transfers. Now the Aggies are also expected to land a wide receiver from Troy by the name of Barber. He will be coming in with almost 1,000 yards receiving last year at Troy. So we'll see what he looks like. And then also A&M adding offensive line help in Armaj Reed Adams coming over from Kansas. So veteran Big 12 lineman, 6'5", 325 pounds. A few more transfer portal nuggets. The Florida Gators landing one of the top defensive backs in the portal, Tulane defensive back DJ Douglas, announcing he will be transferring to Gainesville. Had a nice year in 2023, 54 tackles and 3 interceptions. Over at Arkansas, the Razorbacks adding a pass rusher from the portal, Anton Junkaj, I think is how you'd say it, Juncaj, coming over from the FCS level Albany, where he had led the FCS in solo sacks with 15. So big-time pass rusher there. Former Arkansas DB Jalen Catalon, who had transferred over to Texas, he's on the move once again. He's heading over to play for UNLV, where Barry Odom is the head coach. Of course, he was former Arkansas defense coordinator, so some familiarity there. Over at South Carolina, they're getting a commitment from wide receiver from Miami of Ohio, Gage Larvadane. Comes in 42 catches for almost 700 yards and 6 touchdowns. Gamecocks also picked up a commitment from former Pitt linebacker Bengali Kamara. Spent 4 seasons at Pitt. Big-time contributor for them the last couple years. Had a career high 6.5 tackles for a loss last season. And a couple of recruiting nuggets. Tennessee picked up 4-star tight end out of Texas, Jack Van Dorselaer, for the class of 2025. Meanwhile, Brian Kelly at LSU picked up the number 1 quarterback in the class of 2025 in Bryce Underwood, 5-star quarterback, announcing his commitment to LSU. And it comes at a good time where they just got a commitment from the number 1 running back in 2025 and the number 1 wide receiver in 2025. Now they get the number 1 quarterback. What is in the water there for Brian Kelly at LSU? And quick hoops nugget, as we got SEC hoops underway over the weekend. Auburn crushed Arkansas on the road on Saturday, 83-51. The 32-point margin is Arkansas's worst ever defeat inside of Bud Walton Arena, which opened in November of 1993. One of their worst home losses in program history. Just the start of SEC play, but man, Arkansas got to get some things figured out there. Coach Muss, what is going on? All right, there you have it. You're fully caught up on all the latest news going on with players around the conference. Coming up next, we're going to talk with some big-time ESPN personalities, get their thoughts on the SEC being left out of the championship. What is going on? Should we all be shedding a tear? Should we be worried about the SEC? We'll discuss that next. More Locked On SEC coming up in just a sec. First, I want to remind you guys this episode presented to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL regular season came to an end over the weekend, but we got playoff action, and there's plenty of action to get in on still over at FanDuel. They are America's #1 sportsbook for a reason. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. Their app, super easy to use, so many different ways to get in the action. Live same game parlays. You can find all the bets in the new Explore tab. So whatever you're looking for, they've got it up there for you. They got the Parlay Hub if you're into doing parlays. All of it is up there at FanDuel.com/lockedon. They even got the championship odds for the game tonight. If you like Michigan as the favorite, if you like Washington as the underdog, you can make it happen. And of course, like we said, all the playoff action up there from the NFL. So go visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Go make your first bet a layup. It is FanDuel. They are the official partner of the NFL. Check them out today. I roll on here, Locked On SEC. Thank you guys for making us your first listen every day. Shout out to our everydayers. Come on back tomorrow on the show. We'll have some more guests throughout the week, including Tim Tebow will join us and much more. You don't want to miss that. All right, over the weekend, we were able to attend Media Day for the championship game in Houston. And first, we caught up with just a couple minutes with Kirk Herbstreit. First up, we got his thoughts on his now famous dog, Ben, and also got Kirk's thoughts on the SEC not being here in the championship game. So here was, first up, Kirk Herbstreit.
Here with Kirk Herbstreit. Kirk, I guess it's got to be weird. Everywhere you go, you always get, the center of attention being the face of game day and all this, but now Ben has blown up. What has this been like, the dog getting all the attention now?
That wasn't the goal, to have him do that, but he's been, people I think just really gravitate to a big smile and just a happy dog, and I think he comes in peace, and I think people see that. Like I said, his tail's always wagging, and he's just been walking all around. So I think it's just people enjoy seeing a happy dog.
One other question for you. This is the first time in a decade we don't have an SEC team here. Is it a little weird? I mean, no offense against the two teams that are here, but that SEC passion not here for the first time in a decade.
Yeah, I mean, I think they obviously have a dominant conference, so you kind of get used to them being here, and good for these two teams and the journey that they've been on, with Washington and what they had to overcome, being doubted so many times, and of course Michigan's story with all the distractions with Coach Harbaugh early in the year, late in the year, and they just kind of kept rolling. So the two best teams to me are here, and we're going to play it out on Monday night, see who the champion is.
Next, we caught up with Game Day host Rece Davis. We also got his thoughts on the SEC not being in the national championship game. But first, we kept in here a clip. Rece was finishing up a question from somebody previously where he was asked about some of the best quarterbacks he's ever seen in college. And Rece discussed Cam Newton as the quarterback who had the greatest season of all time in college football. So I thought you guys might be interested in hearing that. So we kept that in. And then, of course, our questions with Rece Davis. Here was Rece Davis.
Well, you know what? Yes, Cam Newton had all due respect to Joe Burrow, Cam Newton had the greatest single season of any quarterback in the history of this sport. One season, nobody better than that guy. I'm not sure, did anybody else on an offense even play in the NFL? I don't think they did. And they had like one or two guys maybe on defense that played in the NFL. Fairley was a great player. But one season? I mean, Mount Rushmore's got to be more than one season. That's why, Joe Burrow had one season. It was a great one, but it was one. But a single season, nobody's ever been greater than Cam Newton. Nobody's ever been close to that, really.
Rece, first time in a decade, not an SEC team isn't here. Is it a little strange not having that passion and, the craziness of the SEC fan bases?
You mean like where it just means more?
Yeah, exactly.
You know what? I think this year was a little bit different, to be honest with you. Not about the passion. The passion of SEC fans is unchanging, but I didn't detect as I was watching the games over the course of the season that there was the type of separation that you've seen some years. There might have been a little, and I think overall it was probably the best conference, depending on how you evaluate that. But I thought there was more quality in terms of contenders and either elite or significantly upper middle class teams in the Pac-12 than anywhere else this year. So the SEC certainly teams got better. Missouri, got better and finished well. Tennessee ended up finishing well, a little bit up and down. But I think because of that, it's not terribly surprising because Alabama had a great year. SEC champions, and they deserved it. They played their best game against Georgia. But, if they played a series, Georgia would have won the series. Didn't win the game. And in our sport, sometimes there is a game that you have to win. And if you don't, you get left on the outside. So I guess from that standpoint, it's not terribly surprising. I mean, Michigan was favored. So, there's one SEC team in the playoff, and Michigan was favored to get here. And I think there was less separation among the conferences this year than there have been in some years.
That said, seeing what Georgia did to Florida State, I mean, everybody was kind of saying, well, clearly Georgia is one of the 4 best teams. Should they have been in?
No, they should not have been in, because best means there are different ways to define best. And how I define best, I described it as, I'm not really an art guy, but for some reason I've come up with this metaphor. It's like a mosaic. And whatever picture you put together, each individual is going to have more emphasis on a certain piece of the artwork, which is your season. And in Georgia's case, if you rolled in and you put all these football guys in, you said you're not allowed to look at the records, just watch tape of 5 games and give me the 4 best teams. Okay, well, Georgia's going in. But some of it has to be, how does that talent, how does that evaluation of how you execute from a football judgment standpoint, which should be used and should be evaluated, how does that translate into which games you won? Is there a particular set of circumstances around you that demanded you win 1 game? For Georgia, it did this year with the number of teams that had a case to be in the playoff. It demanded that they win the SEC against Alabama. If Alabama was a 1-loss team, they had to win the game, and they came up short. And they won 29 in a row. It's hard to win all the games. So I don't think they should have been in. But if you're asking me, if you put a bunch of football people in a room and said, don't look at the scores, don't look at the records, watch 5 games worth of all 22 tape and pick out one of the 4 best teams, Georgia's in. I mean, there's no question about that.
We're also able to catch up with ESPN radio reporter Ian Fitzsimmons to get his thoughts on a number of SEC topics, including most impressive bowl performance and a bunch of other stuff. So here was some of our talk with Ian Fitzsimmons.
Catch up with Ian Fitzsimmons. Ian, is it weird the first time in a decade, really, that the SEC isn't here? It's got to feel a little weird not having that big brand of the SEC and a national championship.
Well, I'd go one further than that, actually. No Ohio State, no Clemson, no Bama, no Georgia. They've kind of been the staples since the college football playoff started. So does it feel weird? Yeah, if you're in SEC country, absolutely. If you're Greg Sankey, you're kind of going, is this bizarro world, right? But look, you play the game for a reason, and I've seen Washington 4 different times. I've seen Michigan, earlier in the year, and they're damn good, man. And so to not have the SEC, is it different? Absolutely, it's different. But it's not just the SEC. You can go a little deeper as far as just the college football playoff overall. And I think just for the game, it was maybe nice to see, or unique, or refreshing to see a Washington back in for the first time in a while. A Texas being in, right? And then in Michigan finally advancing, even with everything surrounding it. There's so many storylines to this national championship game. Are SEC fans going to be missing this? Absolutely, they will. But you still have almost like a villain and a good guy because of Connor Stallions and everything surrounding Michigan. And then just the unique nature of Kalen DeBoer and this Washington Husky team. If you're an SEC fan, you're probably sitting there going, I'm pulling for those dudes in purple.
What you got to see Texas firsthand, at the Sugar Bowl. Kind of been asking some people this question: how SEC ready is Texas and Oklahoma, for that matter?
A&M fans aren't going to like this answer, but they're more ready than A&M fans, and A&M's been over there for over a decade, right? So, and I love, by the way, that we get to see that coming back on Thanksgiving weekend, right? That rivalry, those 2 classic helmets swap and paint again. But I talked to Steve Sarkisian last year, and he said, we're 1 year away. And he was spot on. When I met with him in Big 12 Media Day back in July, he said, we're ready. We're going to make a college football playoff run and a run at the Natty. And they were 1 play away from being right here. So Texas has been built from the guts out. You look at that offensive line with Kelvin Banks on the left side. I mean, that dude is going to play a long time in the National Football League. Christian Jones on the right side is going to get drafted as well. I mean, that was the best class led by Kelvin Banks for an offensive line recruiting class I've seen in 25 years. Led by Kyle Flood and Alabama's assassins. That's what I call Sark's boys, right? A.J. Milwee, Jeff Banks, Kyle Flood. He brought over from Alabama. And then you look at that defensive front with Bo Davis, another Alabama tie. I mean, they have been built like an SEC team from the guts out. And are they ready? Hell yeah, they're ready, especially with Ewers coming back, the majority of that O-line coming back. Sweat, obviously, and Murphy are going to head off to the National Football League, but they got 2 young calves that are back there right now behind those guys. They're going to be cattle by the time ball comes around in August. So he's been building this thing for this moment for 3 years, and yeah, hell yeah, they're ready.
One more for you. Of all the bowl games, I don't know how many you got to watch, but which SEC team maybe impressed you the most? Obviously what Georgia did to Florida State, but obviously
I would discount that game, because I saw Florida State twice this year. That was not the same team. I saw them week 1, and I had them in the ACC championship game, and it was a completely different team. They had 29 opt-outs. Now, you can point to A&M that also had 29 opt-outs of portal guys, only 55 scholarship players, and they gave Oklahoma State all they could handle. So, but still, that wasn't. You think you're going to the college football playoff. You don't. You have all the opt-outs. You have all the portal transfers. That was not the same FSU team. So I discard that one. But Georgia and Bama, I saw them both. And you give me a rematch of that game again that we saw in the SEC championship, and you flip a coin. It's just that you talk about swapping paint. Those two teams can't. They don't despise one another. They flat out hate one another. And I love it. I love me some sports hate, man. So I would say you flipping a coin between Georgia and Alabama. They're just that elite.
Some of the other ones, obviously, Ole Miss takes care of Penn State. Mizzou beats Ohio State. Who had the most impressive win, I guess, of the SEC teams?
Man, now we're going through the Rolodex here. I had 6 bowl games, including this one. I had Ole Miss, so it was impressive, man. And that's why the other part of this whole thing where Quinton Judkins ties Deuce McAllister's all-time record for 100-yard rushing games. And now he's in the portal. Now, that's the negative, right? The positive is that Lane Kiffin went and realized, you know what? We got to play defense. So he goes and gets guys like Walter Nolan from Texas A&M, one of the best interior D linemen in the SEC, along with 8 other guys that are frontline starters on the defensive side of the ball. So watch out for Ole Miss, man, because they're building something. They're going to miss Q without a doubt. And that's portal money. He's going to get paid. It's free agency right now. Mike Gundy told me going rate right now for a quarterback is $2 million. Matt Rule said 1.5. Gundy raised it $500,000, right? So, that's just the world we're living in right now. But Ole Miss is something. They are. Lane Kiffin is not building something. He's built it. Now he's got to sustain it and take it to one more level.
Some of the greatest pipes in college football. Ian Fitzsimmons, thanks for the time, man.
Good to see you, brother.
All right, thanks again to Ian Fitzsimmons. Coming up next, we're going to catch up with half of SEC Network's Marty and McGee, the great Ryan McGee. Will spend some time with us as he gives us advice on who the SEC, who we should be rooting for in the national championship game. We'll discuss that next with Ryan McGee. Still more to come on Locked On SEC, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. First, this episode is presented to you by our friends over at Jase Medical. Look, I know we come here to talk sports, and it's an escape from a lot of the crazy realities in life, but you need to be thinking a little bit about preparing for real life. According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. It can be scary. Can't imagine a more helpless feeling than if your significant other or one of your kids gets sick while a supply chain issue keeps them from the life-saving medication they need. But thankfully, you'll be okay because of Jase Medical. The Jase case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis, so on and so forth. This stuff can happen to any of us. Go visit Jase Medical. It's JASE medical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jasemedical.com and use our offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. That's Jase Medical, JASE medical.com. All right, one more segment to go here on Locked On SEC, and it was a pleasure to catch up at Media Day with Ryan McGee, of course, 50% of Marty and McGee. And look, we asked Ryan, look, you and Marty, y'all are here, but what are you doing? Get to do your show, and not much going on with no SEC team being featured in the national championship. So here was a little bit of our conversation with the great Ryan McGee.
Pleasure to be joined by the great Ryan McGee here at the National Championship. And I'm going to be honest, Ryan, hosting the Locked On SEC podcast, first time in a decade, no SEC team here. This kind of sucks.
It's interesting because this will be the first time since we started Marty and McGee that we're not doing Marty and McGee from the National Championship game. Now I'm here. Right. Marty's going to be here. So we're still here, But when we do the show, we go back to the Wilderness Lodge Studios next weekend, and it's weird because we're going to be like, well, how was the trip? It was great, but there wasn't an SEC school here. But it tells you how spoiled we are, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. And it's but that being said, it's two great stories. It's two great teams. You got the team everybody's hated all year in Michigan. You got the Pac-12 could win the national championship, which they haven't done in like a couple of decades, as the conference explodes. Right. So, yeah, at least there's something to talk about.
Is that, from an SEC perspective, we don't want the Big Ten to get a title. We don't want Michigan and Harbaugh to get a title. So, like, we probably should root for Washington because, like, hey, the Pac-12 won one. Oh, you're no longer a conference.
So I wrote this at the start of the college football playoff with all four schools. I wrote this for SportsCenter. I said, listen, there's a lot of people mad at Alabama because Florida State didn't get in, right? And then there's a lot of people that were mad at Texas just because they're Texas and they just hate Texas. And then there were a lot of people that were mad at Michigan because of the sign-stealing deal. So I'm like, so does that make Washington America's team? Right. I mean, they're named after the father of the country, right? So yeah, but plus I can tell you this, I was really excited to see Michael Penix here where we are today at Media Day because I've never interviewed him at Washington. I interviewed him when he was in Indiana and loved him, but he was hurt all the time and it was at Indiana. And now I think he's like a professional escape artist. And so, it will be interesting, but it is for SEC fans. I go back to when I was a student at Tennessee, which Alabama fans love to hear about. When I was a student at Tennessee, I was there. I'm old, right? So I was there the year of the inaugural SEC championship game. And one of the local TV stations was walking around the campus of Tennessee and asking, who are you rooting for today, Florida or Alabama? And my answer that day was, I'm rooting for a meteor strike, right? I'm rooting for the sewer line to break, for a power outage or whatever. So I'm sure a lot of people back in our footprint probably going to be rooting for that stuff.
There is a little bit of a tie. Will Rogers, all-time Mississippi State passer, will take over for Penix next year, so I guess that's cool. But Dylan Johnson, former Mississippi State running back, there's some SEC ties here. Yeah,
and honestly, if I love Bo Nix, right? And so if you watch Bo Nix play football as much as I did this year, then you've seen Washington. I mean, I watched the Pac-12 a lot, and the Pac-12 was super, super entertaining this year. And so, yeah, with the transfer portal, there are names that you know that you didn't know were at these other places. And so I know on Monday night, a lot of SEC fans will be watching the game and go, wait a minute, I know that name, or I know that name. And a lot of players at SEC schools will be like, oh, yeah, I played there a year ago. And so, yeah, it's just kind of this new age. So you're rooting for laundry, right? You're rooting for the jerseys. And so I'm just rooting for a good game. That's all. At this point, that's all I really care about.
While I got you, let me hit you with a couple of SEC, hot topics. Blake Baker, DC at Missouri, reportedly going over to LSU. Not a surprise they cleaned house defensively for LSU. I mean, you have a Heisman winner and you had 3 losses because the defense was awful.
Yeah, they were bad, and you got it. It's funny. I go back when it's at the end of a regular season. I'll go back and look at the interviews we did with coaches, like in the summertime, like when we were all in Nashville. And Brian Kelly kind of tried to warn us. We got a lot of issues, on the defensive side of the football. But the good news is that they did just enough, certainly with a Heisman Trophy winner, and they did enough to stay in the national spotlight. But yeah, I still think they're ahead of schedule. I think that what Brian Kelly has done in a relatively short period of time, I think because they had that shockingly good first year, I think it kind of masked some of the work they still needed to do. And so, yeah, that's a big hire. It's a really big hire, and it's bad for Missouri. I'm
usually not a fan of a bowl performance carrying over into off-season hype, but we get trapped in it all the time. The way Nussmeier performed for LSU and the way Nico Iamaleava performed for Tennessee, how can you not be excited about both those guys?
Yeah, I feel that way about a lot of the schools going through. I think that, and I do believe in bowl momentum, and it's why I love the bowl game. I'm a bowl guy. I'm always a bowl guy. Kirk Herbstreit somewhere in the building. He and I do not agree on this. I grew up going to bowl games when my dad was an official. I think that it's not just about rewarding a quote-unquote mediocre team. It's about a guy getting to play the last football game of his life. And there's so many of those guys in these games. But I'm a big believer in bowl momentum. I think you talk to any coach, and they will tell you, if they lose the game, they say, whatever. But if they win the game, they will tell you it changes the mood in the building, because they all go back to work. I mean, they're all working out today, right? But they'll all officially be practicing in a few weeks, and so there's absolutely momentum in that. And it's letting those guys like you're talking about know they can lead the team, right? And they have the ability to do that, and now it's on film. So yeah, I agree with you. I think that momentum does matter a little bit.
Last one, just a quick thought on the two new guys, Jeff Lebby at Mississippi State and Mike Elko at A&M. Both fan bases super excited about the hires. I think they're both going to be really good.
I do too, and it's all about fit. It's particularly like at A&M, right? A&M's kind of, well, we're in Texas, right? A&M's just up the road from us, right? Texas is its own world. I think College Station is its own planet, right? And so I think you have to have the right mentality. You have to know how to work the Texas high school deal, which Jimbo, by most measures, did not do a very good job with. It's what Mac Brown always did a great job with at Texas. And so I think that Elko, just walking in the door, has the respect of a lot of that. So, no, I like both of those hires. Yeah, remember a couple years ago we had no new coaches in the conference, and now we're back to at least a couple. You know, in some years we've had half the guys are new.
And a few on the hot seat if they don't turn this thing around very quickly.
The hot seat is a constant thing. Coaches hate that term, but it's the hot seat keeps guys like us in business, so I'm all for it.
They're paid very well. They're okay.
I felt way worse about it when guys like, Kalen DeBoer, the Washington head coach, is right around the corner over here. You know, when he was coaching in Sioux Falls and making $20,000 a year, I feel bad if he's on the hot seat. But if you're making $7.5, $8 million a year, you can afford Bactine or whatever to protect your butt from the hot seat.
He is the better half of Marty McGee. Ryan, it'll be a fun offseason, and look, SEC Media Days will be here before we know it, so thanks for the time, man.
Yes, sir. We're just for the rest of the time, you and I are just going to walk around just going, SEC. See if anybody hears us.
It just means more.
Yeah, see if anybody hears us.
All right. Thanks again to Ryan McGee. Thank you guys for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to our everydayers. Come on back tomorrow on the show and check us out. We'll be recapping all of the latest SEC transfer portal news, draft declarations, coaching changes, whole lot of stuff going on still, even as we head into the offseason. And for your second listen, go check out Locked On's first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, Locked On Sports Today. Streaming there for you. Go subscribe to the first national sports 24/7 streaming channel right there on YouTube. I'm Chris Gordy. Again, championship game tonight. Don't know who's going to win, but we'll see. Michigan versus Washington. I'll go with Washington, right? Michael Penix has been pretty unstoppable this postseason. But for me, Chris Gordy, this has been Locked On SEC. We will talk to you guys tomorrow. Come on back.